San Francisco was a tapestry woven with threads of gold and shadow, a city where the promise of a brilliant future collided with the scars of a forgotten past. On the opulent peaks of Pacific Heights, mansions of stone and glass nestled against the fog rolling in from the Pacific, their polished interiors silent witnesses to a power wielded in whispers and glances, never in shouts. And at the beating heart of this silent elite, Maison Ardente reigned supreme. Maison Ardente was not merely a restaurant, it was a sanctuary, a stage for the city's high society. Its dining rooms, adorned with dark woods that reflected the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, were a haven for bankers whose fortunes moved unseen mountains, for artists whose works hung in international galleries, and for politicians whose decisions shaped the destinies of millions. The air was thick with the aroma of truffles and the discreet clinking of silver on fine china. Every napkin, impeccably folded, every crystal glass, shimmering under the meticulously controlled lighting, was a testament to the order and control that governed this universe. And at the apex of the social hierarchy that frequented this sanctuary, there hovered a figure whose mere presence could alter the flow of time in the room. Vivian Cain was that figure. Wife of Thomas Cain, the billionaire CEO behind Cain Development, she embodied the sophistication and veiled cruelty of San Francisco's elite. Her elegance was unquestionable, her attire always flawless, her bearing that of a queen accustomed to reverence. But it was in her eyes, an icy and discerning blue, that her true power resided. Vivian never needed to raise her voice. Her authority was exercised through subtle intimidation, whispered barbs and smiles that never reached her eyes but could destabilize anyone who dared to cross her path. She was a master of performative humiliation, capable of destroying a reputation with the delicacy of a falling cherry blossom, turning an imperfect service into a public spectacle of shame, all while preserving her image as an impeccable lady. Fear was her most loyal servant, an invisible butler who preceded her every step. Everyone at Maison Ardente, from the waiters to the cooks, from the valets to the managers, feared her. Her entrance was an event, a signal for everyone to adjust, to bow, to mold themselves to her unspoken demands. She needed no formal titles to command. Control was wielded through the awe she inspired, a respect tinged with dread. Her reign was believed to be unshakable, a fortress built on subtle terror and ultimate status. But even the most untouchable queens have a blind spot, and Vivian's was the silent waitress who served her water. A shadow who feared her, yes, but who would soon make her tremble. Across town, where the streets of the Mission District pulsed with the life of vibrant communities and walls were covered in colorful murals, Nora Kim lived a life of stark contrasts. At 24, Nora was an art student, her hands calloused by both paintbrushes and silver trays. Her days were a marathon, classes at City College followed by long night shifts at Maison Ardente, where she moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to be invisible in a world not made for her. Her home was a modest, shared apartment in the Mission, far from the majestic views of Pacific Heights, but close to the heart of a community fighting against the relentless advance of gentrification. Nora was sharp and observant, her eyes always catching the details others missed. She came from a humble background, and the weight of inequality was no abstraction, but a daily reality that shaped her existence. Her family, once anchored by a small neighborhood business, Lighthouse Books, a community bookstore that was the area's meeting point, had been brutally affected by the construction of the Harbor Tower, the massive project by Cain Development. The skyscraper, a monument of glass and steel looming over the city, was not a symbol of progress to her, but a scar, a reminder of the injustice that had befallen her family and the memory of a father who had fallen ill after losing his livelihood and his dream. Her daily life was a quiet resistance. Nora had no time for luxuries. Every dollar she earned went toward her tuition, rent, and helping her younger brother, who was still recovering from the impact of their forced move. She cleaned, served, and smiled politely, while her mind processed the nuances of power and privilege she witnessed. Every cold glance from a patron, every dismissive comment about the new San Francisco, resonated with the pain of her own loss. But behind the facade of an efficient waitress, a flame of indignation burned, fueled not just by personal humiliation, but by the memory of a community torn apart. It was Nora's second month at Maison Ardente. She had learned the rituals, the subtle movements, the art of anticipating a request before it was even made. Marcus O'Neill, the restaurant manager, a man in his early 40s with thinning hair and skin made pale by stress, watched Nora with a mix of apprehension and respect. He saw in her the same quiet resilience that kept him going, but also a spark in her eyes that worried him. He knew Vivian Cain was a walking minefield, and the best strategy was always absolute invisibility. Across the kitchen, Samir Patel, the executive chef with whom Nora shared a mutual respect, also watched her. A practical, direct man with a dry wit, Samir saw a rare honesty and dedication in Nora, qualities he protected with his explosive temper against the whims of wealthy patrons. Still, the fear was palpable among the staff whenever Vivian Kane was expected. Marcus would reinforce instructions, voices would drop lower, movements would become more hurried. Nora felt the tension in the air, an electric hum that settled in hours before Mrs. Kane's arrival. She tried to focus on her tasks, polishing one more glass, arranging another set of silverware, but Vivian's shadow loomed over the dining room long before she walked through the door. Then, the night came. The room was nearly full, a lively buzz of conversation and laughter. The aroma of a freshly served lobster bisque hung over the tables. Nora was in the middle of service, balancing a tray with delicate care, when she felt the sudden shift in atmosphere. The buzz ceased for a moment, as if someone had pulled an invisible brake. She turned her head and saw her, Vivian Kane, wrapped in a flowing silk dress, her diamond necklace sparkling under the light. She was entering Maison Ardente, the personification of untouchable majesty. Her eyes swept the room with calculated slowness, capturing every gaze, asserting her dominance without a single word. Nora felt her heart race but kept her composure. She had been assigned to Vivian's section that night. She tried to keep a respectful distance, but Vivian's eyes found her. Mrs. Kane smiled, a polished smile that never reached her eyes, and made a discreet gesture with her hand, beckoning Nora to approach. Dinner proceeded with the invisible orchestra of luxury service, with Nora attending to the table's demands with almost robotic efficiency. She knew she was being watched, her every move scrutinized, every word analyzed. The complaint came without warning, like a cold needle prick. Vivian leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Nora, her smile still in place. "My dear," she began, her voice soft but with an edge of steel. "There's an art to service, isn't there? Something that transcends the mere delivery of dishes. It's about anticipation, subtlety, invisibility. And yet, here we are." The comment was about the wine, which was supposedly a degree short of divine perfection. It wasn't a shout, but a hiss, a distilled poison that spread across the table, capturing the attention of other patrons. Discreet laughter and curious glances pierced Nora, while Vivian's face maintained an expression of pure, dismissive politeness, as if she were merely correcting a trivial error. Nora felt cold sweat run down her back, her cheeks burning not just with shame, but with a silent rage that seared in her chest. The humiliation wasn't just personal. It resonated with the memory of her father's bookstore, with the gazes of the developers, with the coldness of the negotiations that had torn her family from its roots. In that moment, under the restaurant's golden lights, Nora felt not only the weight of that humiliation, she felt the echo of a greater injustice, a pattern that had already shaped her life and the future of her community. Something inside her had broken, and something new, dangerous, had awakened. The seed of defiance had been planted. In the days that followed, the humiliation still echoed in Nora's mind, a constant reminder of her place. She needed the paycheck. Any direct reaction could cost her the job, and she couldn't afford that. Relief was a luxury she couldn't afford. The first hurdle was keeping her job. Nora learned to be invisible during tense moments, to maintain her composure, to slip along the edges of Vivian's attention like a shadow. Marcus, with a look of disguised concern, warned her to stay in the shadows when Mrs. Kane was around. "She has her favorites and her targets," he whispered one day, averting his gaze. But Vivian Kane seemed to have found a new target. The small provocations from before evolved into subtle but increasingly elaborate public attacks. Vivian began to request Nora specifically whenever she wanted to perform a theatrical humiliation, turning the service into a spectacle. Comments about Nora's humble origins, suggestions of a smoky smell on her clothes, critiques of her performance in front of influential guests. She tested Nora with impossible requests, demanding a dish not on the menu or asking for a bottle of wine she knew was sold out, only to publicly reprimand her for her lack of foresight. Vivian's icy eyes followed Nora, every step, every movement, as if waiting for the perfect moment for the next blow. Instead of breaking, Nora used the pain as fuel. She became an even more meticulous observer. Each of Vivian's attacks was dissected, every nuance of her strategy studied. Nora noticed the slight tremor in Vivian's fingers when she was truly annoyed, the way she touched her necklace when searching for a new way to intimidate. She began making small adjustments to the service, anticipating Vivian's whims, offering what she might ask for before the words even left her lips. Her responses were measured, brief, and impeccably professional, but carried a quiet dignity that irritated Vivian even more. Nora also began to build quiet alliances. Marcus, the manager, though he feared Vivian, showed small acts of protection, assigning her to other sections when possible or interceding with a look when the situation became unbearable. Samir, the chef, whose kitchen was his sacred kingdom, started leaving extra plates for Nora after particularly difficult shifts or murmuring a gruff encouragement that Nora knew came from a place of genuine concern. The kitchen, with its warmth and the clang of pans, became a refuge, a counterpoint to the frigid dining room. But Nora's resilience went beyond mere survival. With every humiliation, every memory of lighthouse books, the silent indignation solidified into a clearer purpose. This was no longer just a personal problem. It was a battle for something bigger, a matter of justice that extended far beyond the walls of Maison Ardent. The memories of her father, once a vibrant man passionate about books, now laid low by illness and loss, were a constant incentive. The acceptance of a pitiful offer from Kane Development, the crushing pressure that forced them to sell the block, the way the community unraveled without its heart, all of it swirled in her mind, turning anger into something more. Nora started digging. On her days off, instead of resting, she visited the public library, consulted old local newspaper archives, and scoured public records on the Harbor Tower's approval. She learned to navigate the systems, to decipher the bureaucratic language. Every article, every paragraph about the city's real estate expansion, every mention of Kane Development was analyzed with the same attention she devoted to her art studies. She uncovered names of shell companies used by Kane Development, complex webs of corporations that seemed to obscure more than they revealed. Old news about a bribery case involving zoning and construction permits, a case that had been mysteriously shelved years ago, began to catch her attention. Nora's motivation had shifted. It was no longer about surviving. It was about unearthing the truth. The air in the public library, thick with the scent of aging paper and the respectful silence found only in sanctuaries of knowledge, stood in stark contrast to the perfume of truffles and the clinking of crystal at Maison Ardent. It was here, among stacks of dusty files and whirring microfilm readers, that Nora Kim spent every free hour diving into San Francisco's past. Each visit was an expedition, each discovery a breath of fresh air in her quest for justice. She started with the obvious: Kane Development, public records of real estate projects, zoning approvals, city council meeting minutes. The names of shell companies emerged like a complex web, each leading to another, obscuring the true origin of the transactions. She noted everything, drawing diagrams in her sketchbook, her hands accustomed to shaping forms and colors, now shaping information. Art, for Nora, had always been a way of seeing the invisible, of giving form to the voiceless. Now, she was applying that same lens to reality. Lighthouse Books, the name of her father's old bookstore. A small establishment on the edge of the Mission District. It was more than a shop. It was a beating heart for the community. She remembered the smell of coffee and books, the laughter of children during story hour, the heated discussions about politics and poetry that filled the small space. She remembered the light in her father's eyes as he recommended a new novel, the way he knew every customer by name, every book like an old friend. The photos in her notebook, taken with her phone, were all that remained. A reddish brick facade, a window display with stacks of classics, the hand-painted sign, now replaced by a generic, impersonal coffee shop. Nora found the eminent domain documents. The legal language was cold and impersonal, describing her home and her family's bookstore as property to be acquired for urban development. The offer from Kane Development had been laughable, as her father had always said, but the relentless pressure, the eviction notices, the promise that progress can't be stopped, had crushed the community's resistance. One by one, the neighbors had accepted the inevitable, their homes and small businesses swallowed by the wave of gentrification that promised a more modern future for the city. Nora's father, a man whose vitality seemed inseparable from his bookstore, slowly fell ill after that, his spirit extinguished, his body wasting away in silence. Guilt mixed with sorrow in Nora's memory, a burden she carried daily. She found the name of a former community lawyer, Elias Vance, a man who had tried to fight off the sharks from Kane Development. Her search led her to a cafe in the Castro, where Vance, now retired and visibly weary, but with the glint of an old fire in his eyes, was thumbing through a newspaper. Nora, hesitant, approached him, explaining her purpose. Elias Vance watched her for a long moment, his blue eyes scanning the determination on the young woman's face. "The Harbor Tower," he said, his voice raspy, "one of my greatest failures, or perhaps their greatest triumph." He sighed, gesturing for Nora to sit. "Kane Development is a well-oiled machine, Ms. Kim. They don't leave tracks. Or if they do, they're so well hidden that no one bothers to look." Vance spoke of the pressure tactics, Thomas Kane's political ties, The way negotiations had suddenly turned hostile, the environmental reports that had vanished. There was a rumor, he said, lowering his voice, about a bribery case in the zoning commission. A board member who changed his mind at the last minute on a crucial vote. But the case was shelved. No explanation. No key witness ever came forward. He pointed to a yellowed article he had saved for years, highlighting a small footnote. The refusal of a central witness to testify led to the collapse of the case against Kane Development, citing personal reasons. The witness's name wasn't there, only the reference. I tried, but they were too big, too powerful. Elias Vance handed Nora a thin folder of documents. These are copies of the few papers I managed to get before everything was sealed. Maybe there's something I missed. Nora left the cafe with the folder and a new sense of urgency. Her conversation with Vance had validated her instincts, but also revealed the scale of the challenge. The case wasn't just about eminent domain. It was about corruption, about the invisible threads of power that stretched across the entire city. Her motivation had transformed completely. It was no longer about personal humiliation, or even the injustice against her family. It was a search for something moral, an attempt to expose the truth behind an empire of appearances. While Nora delved into the shadows of the past, Vivian Kane, oblivious to the budding investigation, continued to weave her own web of control and humiliation in the present. With each day, her aversion to Nora seemed to grow, fueled by the waitress's quiet dignity, by the way she refused to be broken. Vivian had crowned herself the queen of Maison Ardente, and Nora, the newcomer, was an affront, a speck of dirt that needed to be crushed under her fine heel. The escalation of harassment was cruel and calculated. The small provocations from before became increasingly elaborate tests of endurance, designed to expose Nora to maximum public humiliation. One Friday night, Maison Ardente was buzzing with the local elite. Nora was in the middle of a hectic service, balancing a tray of cocktails, when Vivian, seated at her favorite table, raised a hand with a devilish smile. "Nora, my dear." Her voice cut through the chatter like glass. "I have a curiosity. My cocktail? The Étoile du Soir. It's a bit dull tonight. Could you, with your artistic insight, bring me a fresh blue lotus flower? One that reflects the depth of the ocean? If it's not too much to ask, of course." The request was absurd. Blue lotus flowers were rare in San Francisco, and getting a fresh one in the middle of dinner service was impossible. Marcus, the manager, watched from afar, his face contorted with anxiety. Nora felt the eyes of everyone present turn to her, the weight of expectation and ridicule. "Mrs. Kane," Nora replied, her voice perfectly controlled. "Unfortunately, we do not have fresh blue lotuses available at the moment. However, Chef Samir has prepared a special water lily garnish that, I believe, has a similar hue and the same delicacy." Vivian smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, lilies. So predictable. But I understand. Not everyone has the privilege of appreciating true exclusivity, do they, Nora?" The bob was a subtle poison. The banker at the next table chuckled discreetly. Nora kept her chin up. She brought the cocktail with the lily, feeling the heat of Vivian's piercing gaze. On another occasion, during a dinner with a group of socialite friends, Vivian commented on the smoky smell of Nora's clothes, suggesting she spent too much time in less airy parts of the city, with a smile that would freeze the soul. Vivian's friends laughed, and Nora felt the blush of shame rise up her neck, but her voice remained steady as she asked if there was anything else she could do. Vivian devised ever more sophisticated tests. She would ask Nora to find a specific, obscure vintage of wine she knew had been sold out for years, only to publicly reprimand her for her incompetence when the waitress returned empty-handed. Or she would change orders at the last minute, demanding a dish be prepared without an essential ingredient, and then criticize Nora for her lack of communication with the chef. Marcus, the manager, saw the situation deteriorating. He tried to protect Nora discreetly, giving her tasks in farther sections, but Vivian seemed to have a sixth sense. She demanded Nora be at her table, to ensure perfect service. Marcus, with a sigh, would give Nora long to-do lists, hoping she could keep busy enough to avoid Vivian's attention, but it was a losing battle. "You have to be a ghost around her, Nora," Marcus whispered one night, his eyes full of worry. "Invisible. It's the only way." He had tried to intervene once, very early on, with a polite suggestion to Vivian about staff well-being, and the look she had given him had silenced him for months. He knew what was at stake. His own job hung by a thread. But Nora refused to become a ghost. Every humiliation, every icy glance, every condescending laugh was a hammer blow on her resolve, forging it into something harder. She watched Vivian, studying her habits, her mannerisms. She noticed the disguised impatience, the way she adjusted her diamond necklace when she was plotting a new attack. Nora didn't break. She absorbed, transforming the pain into focus. One evening, Nora forgot her small sketchbook in the staff room, a place Vivian occasionally frequented to inspect the cleanliness. The next day, Vivian called her to the table. In her hands was Nora's sketchbook. She flipped through the pages with a mocking smile, lingering on an abstract sketch Nora had made of the harbor tower, its lines sharp and angular, almost menacing. "Ah, Nora," Vivian said, her eyes dancing with malice. "Protest art. So, passé. And rather naive, don't you think? To believe a pencil can topple pillars of steel. But keep practicing, dear. Perhaps one day your sketches will be as flawless as your napkins." She tossed the sketchbook back at Nora with a careless gesture. Nora felt her blood boil, but she took a deep breath. "Thank you for the encouragement, Mrs. Kane. I believe that art sometimes can reveal truths that stone and steel hide." Her tone was calm but loaded with a subtext that Vivian, for a brief second, seemed to catch. The socialite's smile faltered. Samir, the chef, whose kitchen was a refuge from the dining room's drama, also noticed the tension. He saw Nora return from Vivian's table, her face pale, but her eyes still burning. One night he saw her trembling slightly as she chopped vegetables. "You're not going to let her break you, are you?" he asked, his voice gruff but with an underlying kindness. Nora just shook her head, speechless. "Good," he muttered, "because she's not worth the dirt on your shoes." He pushed a plate of steaming pasta toward her, a simple comfort amid the turmoil. Samir, a practical and direct man with a dry wit, saw a rare honesty and dedication in Nora, qualities he protected with his explosive temper against the whims of wealthy patrons. He trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him that Nora Kim was a soul of integrity in a sea of superficiality. Nora's resistance wasn't just emotional. She started using her observations to subtly defend herself. If Vivian asked for a specific wine Nora knew was sold out, she would anticipate it, offering an alternative, similar in profile, but perhaps more accessible, before Vivian could even make her impossible request. Small adjustments in service, brief and professional responses, but all carrying an unshakable dignity. Vivian grew irritated but couldn't find a technical fault to have her fired. Nora was becoming a rock, unmovable, and it infuriated Vivian even more. The folder Elias Vance had given Nora was a treasure trove of clues. Among the documents were transcripts of zoning commission meetings, internal memos from Kane Development, and newspaper clippings from the Bayline Tribune from years ago, the small local paper that refused to be silenced. The smell of old paper hung over Nora's small apartment, now transformed into an operations center. Stacks of books on urban planning and real estate law competed for space with her paints and canvases. Nora spent sleepless nights immersed in the details. She deciphered the fine print of technical reports, the ambiguous language of legal opinions. Every term, every date, was a piece of a complex puzzle. The frustration was constant. There were so many gaps, so many generic names, so many documents that seemed to evade a clear conclusion. She found herself lost in a labyrinth of bureaucracy, and at times, exhaustion made her doubt herself. Could a simple waitress, an art student, really challenge an empire? One day, while reviewing one of the articles from the Bayline Tribune, a community newspaper known for its dogged pursuit of local truth, she came across a bold headline from years ago. "Bribery Scandal Rocks. Zoning Commission, Harbor Tower Project at Center of Investigation." The article detailed the bribery scandal haunting the city's zoning commission. A controversial real estate project, the Harbor Tower, was under investigation for alleged donations to city officials in exchange for swift and favorable approvals. The case had made headlines, but then, as Elias had said, it was mysteriously shelved. Nora felt a chill. This was the heart of Elias Vance's mystery. The article mentioned the refusal of a key witness to testify, collapsing the case for lack of evidence, and in a footnote, almost invisible, there it was. Mrs. Alden, then an assistant to the project manager at Kane Development, cited personal conflicts of interest for her absence. Alden. It was a name she'd seen before. In her relentless research, she had found a brief biography of Thomas Kane in a business magazine, mentioning his wife, Vivian, and her maiden name, Vivian Alden, the same Vivian Alden. The revelation hit Nora with the force of a punch to the gut. The air left her lungs. Vivian Kane wasn't just the billionaire's wife, the queen of Maison Ardente, the architect of social humiliations. She was Vivian Alden, the witness who had refused to testify, the woman who had shielded her husband's project from accusations of corruption. She wasn't a mere beneficiary of the wealth. She was an active accomplice, an integral part of the machine that had crushed her community. Lighthouse books, her father's illness, the displaced families, all of it bore Vivian Kane's fingerprints. The anger Nora had felt before was a glowing ember. Now it was an all-consuming fire. The quest for justice was no longer an abstract concept. It had a face, a name, a story that connected directly to the woman who humiliated her every day. The truth about Vivian wasn't just about power. It was about the corruption of character, the cold, calculated manipulation that had allowed the harbor tower to rise on the ruins of lives. She continued her research with renewed intensity. She combed through the documents Vance had given her, looking for connections, tangible proof. She found internal correspondence from Kane Development, email exchanges about adjustments to environmental impact reports, bank statements of donations to a ghost foundation that, in turn, had funneled money into the accounts of city officials, and, most shockingly, an old program from a Kane Development charity event, where Vivian, listed as Vivian Alden, was described as CEO Thomas Kane's right hand in the planning phase of the harbor tower. Every piece confirmed the story. Every fragment solidified the guilt. Nora looked at the old photos of Lighthouse Books, her father's bookstore. In those faded images, she saw more than just a building. She saw the soul of a community, a place where stories were told and shared, where voices were heard. The memory of her father, a man who radiated joy and a passion for books, now a shell of his former self, weighed even more heavily on Nora. The anger transformed into an unshakable purpose. She had the pieces. She had the story. Now she needed to find a way to tell it. The tension at Maison Ardente always ramped up in preparation for the Lighthouse Gala. It was the restaurant's annual charity event, a black-tie affair for the city's elite, packed with press, photographers, and San Francisco's most influential figures. The dining room would be transformed into a spectacle of lights and luxury, the perfect venue to display power and philanthropy. For Vivian Kane, it was her night, a stage where she shone brightest. But this year, Vivian was planning more than just to shine. She was planning a spectacle of terror and personal triumph. Nora Kim's quiet resistance had become an unbearable affront. The waitress refused to break, to disappear, to conform to the role Vivian had designed for her, and that was unforgivable. Vivian had noticed Nora's stares, the intensity behind her composure, the way the young woman absorbed every detail. She sensed the underlying threat, the unspoken defiance. The waitress wasn't just a victim, she was an observer, and that was dangerous. It's time to teach her a lesson she will never forget, Vivian muttered to herself as she adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat, the same one she wore to all her major public appearances, an expensive, distinctive piece, a symbol of her unshakable status. Vivian's plan was meticulous, conceived with the same calculated coldness she applied to her daily humiliations. At the height of the Lighthouse Gala, in front of all of San Francisco's elite and the scandal-hungry press, she would stage a scene. She would accuse Nora of stealing her precious necklace, which would disappear from her table. The exposure would be public, devastating. Nora, the student from a humble background, the invisible waitress, would be unmasked as a thief, her reputation and future destroyed. It would be a clear message to all who dared to challenge the power of the Kanes. Vivian thought through the details. How would the necklace vanish? She had a small secret compartment in her handbag, large enough to discreetly tuck it away. The accusation would come at the moment the cameras were most attentive, at the peak of dinner, when all eyes were on her. Nora, of course, would be assigned to her table, as always, the perfect scapegoat. No one would question Vivian Kane's word against a waitress's. "It will be a memorable evening," she told Thomas, who was more concerned with investors and the company's balance sheet than with his wife's social dramas. He just nodded distractedly, immersed in his own business plans. Vivian smiled. Thomas would never understand the complexities of her war. Marcus, oblivious to Vivian's plans, confirmed to Nora that she would be serving the Kanes' table at the Lighthouse Gala. Nora nodded, a strange calm settling over her. She knew Vivian wanted her there, wanted to see her break. But Nora had plans of her own. Discovering the truth about Vivian Kane had been a turning point. It was no longer just a desire for revenge, but a need to expose the injustice, to give voice to the silenced. Nora's indignation had transformed into a cold clarity, an unshakable purpose. She knew she was preparing for a battle, and she needed her own weapons. Nora spent days and nights organizing her findings. The documents from Elias Vance, the clippings from the Bayline Tribune, the transcripts of the zoning commission meetings, photographs of the old bookstore, taken by her father, and the ones she herself had taken of her community's ruins. Every piece of paper was a fragment of a larger narrative, proof of the web of corruption and manipulation. She had a longtime friend, Lina Morales, a recent journalism graduate working for a small, independent news site, always on the hunt for community interest stories. Lina was sharp, with a spark of idealism that Nora admired. They met at a discreet cafe in the Mission District, far from the prying eyes of Maison Ardente. "I need your help, Lina," Nora said, her voice low but firm. She showed Lina the newspaper clippings, the references to Vivian Alden, the connection to the Harbor Tower case. Lena, a shrewd professional, saw the potential of the story immediately. "This is big, Nora, if you have the proof." Nora didn't reveal her full plan, but she asked Lina how a journalist would verify the authenticity of documents, how a story like this could be released. Lina explained about anonymous sources, the importance of backups, and the need for multiple sources to corroborate facts. "You have to have it all locked down tight," Lina warned. "They'll come after you with everything they have." The gravity of Lina's words weighed on Nora. Fear was a constant companion. She was about to challenge one of the most powerful empires in the city, with a ruthless woman as its queen. But the image of her father's wasting face, the memory of the bookstore that was the heart of her community, were stronger than any fear. Nora began to prepare an art exhibit in her mind. She visualized the paintings, the sculptures, the installations that could tell the story of the bookstore and the lost community. But before her art could speak, the truth needed to come out. And she knew exactly where and when the truth would have the greatest impact. She organized a small dossier of evidence. She photographed every document, every bank statement, every newspaper clipping, creating digital and physical copies. She stored them on an encrypted flash drive, and in a small discreet leather pouch she would wear on the night of the gala. Inside the pouch, alongside the copies of the documents, was a small voice recorder, bought at an electronics store. A subtle detail, but one that could be crucial. She knew she needed more than words. She needed unquestionable evidence. In her art studio, amidst unfinished canvases and colorful paints, Nora mentally rehearsed the words she would say. They would not be words of anger, but of clarity, of facts, of a narrative that would dismantle Vivian Kane's polished facade. She wanted justice, not just revenge. She wanted to give a voice to the voiceless. The night of the Lighthouse Gala was approaching. Maison Ardente shone like a diamond, ready for its annual spectacle of luxury and power. Vivian Kane, in her mind, had already won, preparing her trap to humiliate Nora definitively. She didn't know that, beneath her waitress's discreet uniform, Nora carried the arsenal that would detonate her world. The scales of justice were about to tip, and the weight of truth was heavier than any gold. The Lighthouse Gala was, for Thomas Kane, just another piece on his corporate chessboard. Charity was an excellent tool for networking, for softening Kane Development's public image, and for ensuring political favors continued to flow. He saw journalists as necessary hounds whose lenses and microphones could be directed where he wanted, if the reins were held tightly. But Thomas was a man of numbers, contracts, and results. Vivian's social dramas, while sometimes annoying, were just background noise to his larger goals. Vivian, however, lived for the glamour of these events. The gala was her runway, her pulpit. She spent hours preparing, choosing the perfect dress, the right jeweler. Her diamonds, particularly the distinctive necklace, were not just adornments. They were armor, symbols of a power she believed was unbreakable. In the days leading up to the gala, she intensified the pressure on Nora, almost as a final taunt. "Nora," Vivian said one day with an angelic smile, as Nora cleared her table after lunch, "you have such interesting skin. A little tired, perhaps? It's life in the Mission, isn't it? So full of authenticity." She made a vague gesture with her hand. "You should take better care of yourself. After all, appearance is everything in this world, isn't it?" Nora felt the blow, the insinuation about her humble background and lack of resources, but she just smiled politely. "I'm doing fine, Mrs. Kane. Life in the Mission has its own beauty." Nora's controlled response, her refusal to shrink, fueled Vivian's silent fury. The socialite wanted to see Nora broken, begging. The idea that a mere waitress could maintain her dignity in the face of her power was an unbearable affront. In her mind, Nora had to be erased, and the gala would be the perfect stage for it. Vivian planned every step of her trap. She pictured the moment she would discover the necklace was missing, the look of horror on her face, the panic in the room, the cameras turning to her, the elegant victim, and then the accusatory stare, the finger pointed at Nora. It was the waitress, the only one who was close enough. No one would doubt her. It would be a masterstroke. She rehearsed in front of the mirror, practicing the shocked expression, the trembling voice, the controlled indignation. She practiced hiding the necklace in her handbag, a quick, imperceptible move. The sparkle of the diamonds under her closet lights was a preview of her triumph. Control was her fetish, and with Nora she would reclaim total control. For Nora, the nights before the gala were a mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. She slept little, dreaming of the faces of the humiliated, of her father's bookstore in ruins. In her small studio she painted frantically, no longer for her class, but for herself. Abstract canvases depicting the strength of a severed tree's roots, the resilience of the Mission District's vibrant colors, the tired but hopeful eyes of her community. Art was her catalyst, her diary, her way of translating pain into power. One night, her younger brother Leo, who was 10, came into her makeshift studio. He had a comic book in his hands. "Nora, are you drawing stuff from Dad's bookstore again?" he asked, pointing to a melancholic sketch of empty shelves. Nora smiled, a sad smile. "I am, Leo. It's important to remember." "But why remember something sad?" he questioned, with the innocence of a child. "Can't we just make a new bookstore? A bigger one?" Leo's words struck Nora deep in her soul. "It's more complicated than that, little one. But I'm trying to fix things, so no one else has to go through what we did." Leo just nodded, not truly understanding the depth of her mission, but sensing the intensity in his sister. He curled up beside her as she drew, the silence filled by their mutual company. That moment with Leo reinforced Nora's resolve. She wasn't fighting just for herself, or for her father, but for all the children like Leo, so they could have a future where justice might prevail. The flash drive with the evidence was always with her, tucked into a small secret pocket she'd sewn into her waitress apron, along with the voice recorder. She reviewed the documents, the emails, the bank statements. The connection between Thomas Kane, Vivian Alden, now Kane, the shell companies, and the city official who had received donations was there, clear for anyone who cared to look. She had the truth. Her ally, the journalist Lena Morales, called her regularly, checking on her progress, offering advice. "You have to be absolutely sure, Nora. Any flaw and they will destroy you," Lena repeated. "And the story has to be irrefutable. This isn't just a story, it's a war." Nora felt the weight of it all, the enormity of the task ahead. There were nights when doubt assailed her, when the fear of confronting such immense power made her question her sanity. She pictured losing her job, being ridiculed, maybe even sued. What if she failed? What if it was all for nothing, and Vivian Kane emerged even stronger? On one of those sleepless nights, she found herself standing at her apartment window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. The Harbor Tower, Kane Development's massive skyscraper, pierced the night sky like a glass dagger, a monument to ambition, to impunity. And it was then that her father's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from an afternoon in the bookstore of him reading a poem. "Though the stars may be extinguished, the truth will still shine. No matter how strong the storm, the soul will not bend. And justice, though it may be late, has its time." Her father's words were not about revenge, but about resilience, about an unshakable belief in truth and justice. Nora wasn't seeking just to bring down Vivian Kane. She was seeking to build something new, to restore memory, to give voice to the forgotten. Her triumph would not be in destruction, but in revelation. Her choice of weapon was clear. Not violence, not shouting, but articulated truth, an unarmed narrative. She would use the attention of the elite, the cameras of the press, the platform that Vivian had inadvertently created for her. She would turn Vivian's trap into her own opportunity. On the night of the Lighthouse Gala, Maison Ardent was a spectacle of light and sound. Luxury cars discharged impeccably dressed guests. Camera flashes illuminated the entrance. Reporters' microphones extended in search of a quote. Inside, the hall buzzed with the energy of hundreds of powerful and elegant people. Nora, dressed in her waitress uniform, the discreet pouch containing her evidence slung over her shoulder, felt her heart pound. She looked at her own reflection in a polished surface. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a cold determination. It felt like walking into the lion's den, but she was not defenseless. She carried with her not just the truth, but the spirit of her father's bookstore, the voice of her community. The stage was set. The queen was ready for her final game. But so was the waitress. Maison Ardent buzzed like a gilded beehive, but it was not the gentle hum of conversation and laughter Nora knew. It was an amplified murmur, the electric anticipation that preceded San Francisco's grandest social spectacles. The Lighthouse Gala was at its peak. The hall, transformed into a garden of crystal and rare flowers, shimmered under the relentless flash of cameras. Journalists, their microphones extended like curious serpents, prowled the tables, capturing snippets of talk about philanthropy and the latest corporate scandals. At every table, the pillars of the city's elite, bankers, investors, politicians, socialites, wore their wealth as easily as they breathed the rarefied air of their privilege. Nora moved among them, a specter in her waitress uniform, the heavy tray in her hands, but with a strange lightness in her spirit. The flash drive and the small voice recorder rested in her secret pocket, a comforting weight against her skin. She could feel Vivian Kane's eyes on her, as always, a predatory gaze promising the final strike. Vivian's table was a center of gravity, surrounded by her court of admirers and, of course, by Thomas Kane, the CEO, who, deep in a conversation about mergers and acquisitions, barely seemed to notice the rising tension. The orchestra, tucked into a decorated alcove, played a soft melody, an ironic counterpoint to the imminent drama. Nora served a glass of wine to Thomas Kane, her movements precise, her expression calm. She knew this was the moment, the stage that Vivian had, inadvertently, set for her. And then, Vivian's show began. A slight nudge of her elbow, a rehearsed gasp, and Vivian Kane brought a hand to her neck. Her expression, once one of polished indifference, morphed into sudden shock, followed by a wave of elegantly controlled panic. Her eyes scanned the table, then the floor, her designer handbag. "My God," she murmured, her voice, though low, cutting through the music and chatter like a razor wire. "My necklace, it's gone." A silence fell over the hall like a heavy shroud. Heads turned. The camera flashes, once sporadic, now exploded in a blinding shower. Vivian, a natural actress, dramatized her dismay, her hands trembling, but her eyes still calculating. Thomas Kane, alarmed by the sudden shift in tone, rose to his feet, his business-focused face now twisted in a mixture of irritation and social concern. "What?" he demanded, his voice louder than usual. Vivian pointed to the table, to the empty space where her diamond necklace should have been. Her eyes, icy and accusatory, finally locked onto Nora, who stood nearby, pouring water for a guest. "Nora," her voice was now a web of honey and venom, "you were the last one to be so close to my table. You served me the wine. Then the coffee?" She paused, her words dripping with insinuation. "My necklace. It was right here. And now, it's gone." Vivian's gaze intensified, a dagger aimed at Nora's heart. "I can't believe it. Someone has stolen my necklace, and you, Nora, were the only person with such close access." A murmur rippled through the tables. The words theft, waitress, scandal echoed. A reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle, microphone in hand, was already approaching, her eyes gleaming with the promise of a juicy story. "A public search, immediately," Vivian demanded, her voice gaining strength, directed at Marcus, the manager, who was frozen in terror. "This waitress must be searched." Marcus's face went pale. "Mrs. Kane, please, it's a necessity." Vivian cut him off, her gaze like steel. "Or are you suggesting my necklace simply levitated out of the room?" Nora felt the weight of every stare on her, the heat of the flashes, the buzz of whispers growing louder. A complete, public humiliation, executed with the cruel mastery of Vivian Kane. It was exactly what she had predicted. And for a brief second, doubt crept in. Fear seized her, a knot in her throat. But then, she remembered her father, the bookstore, Leo, the words he had read about truth and justice. The ember of indignation ignited into a cold, unshakable fire. Nora Kim did not shrink. Instead, she did something no one expected. She took a step forward, into the center of attention, where the flashes were most intense. Her eyes met Vivian's, a silent but powerful challenge. She felt the small recorder in her pocket, the click she had made seconds earlier, capturing Vivian's words. "Mrs. Kane," Nora said, her voice calm, surprisingly clear, cutting through the noise with an unexpected authority. "I understand your distress, and I am willing to be searched, if that is truly necessary. But first, I ask for just one moment to recount a series of facts that, I believe, are pertinent to this discussion." The hall fell silent again. The audacity of Nora, the humble waitress, to not just respond but to command the floor, shocked everyone. Vivian looked at her with a mixture of fury and confusion, her smile vanishing. Thomas Kane watched Nora with a sudden interest, his corporate expression now charged with curiosity. Nora took a deep breath. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the journalist who had crowded closer, hungry for every word. She then turned to Vivian and Thomas Kane, and her voice, though not loud, was freighted with a calculated clarity, with an inner fire that burned through every syllable. "Many years ago," Nora began, her voice echoing in the hall, "in this very city, a massive real estate project was approved. The Harbor Tower, a development that promised progress, but for many families it meant the loss of their homes, their businesses, their communities. My family was among them. My father owned Lighthouse Books, a community bookstore in the Mission District. We lost everything. The murmurs started again, but this time they were not of scorn, but of confusion and surprise. Nora was not defending herself. She was telling a bigger story. During the approval phase of the Harbor Tower, there were rumors of bribery in the city's zoning commission. A case was opened, but it was mysteriously shelved. The reason? A key witness refused to testify. Nora paused, her eyes fixed on Vivian. It was claimed to be due to personal conflicts of interest. She then, with a precise movement, pulled the flash drive from her pocket. "I have here, and in copies that have already been shared with the press," she said, nodding toward Lina Morales, who was now approaching, her face a mask of seriousness, "documents that connect Kane Development to that controversial case." Nora projected an image onto one of the large monitors in the hall, originally meant to display slides for the charity. It was a bank statement. This statement shows a transfer of donations from a Kane Development shell company to a foundation that, coincidentally, funneled funds into the account of a key city official at the time. A louder buzz erupted. Thomas Kane's eyes widened slightly, his face hardening. "And here," Nora continued, projecting another image, "is internal correspondence from Kane Development. An email between executives requesting adjustments to a city official's file shortly before that crucial vote." She then displayed a photo of an old newspaper clipping from the Bayline Tribune. This newspaper, which has always championed the voices of the silenced, mentioned the refusal of a key witness, and in a small footnote, it referenced Mrs. Alden, then an assistant to the project manager at Kane Development. Vivian's eyes widened in shock, her composure shattering for the first time. She looked like she couldn't breathe. Nora then projected the final image. "And this, an old program from the Harbor Tower's launch event, lists Mrs. Vivian Alden as CEO Thomas Kane's right hand in the planning phase." She looked directly at Vivian. "Mrs. Kane, your maiden name was Alden. You were the witness who refused to testify, shielding your husband's project from accusations of corruption." The silence was deafening. The camera flashes were a machine gun. The journalists were frantic, typing on their phones, calling their newsrooms. Lina Morales was already on her cell, confirming the information Nora had previously given her with the documents she held in her hand. "So," Nora continued, her voice maintaining the same calculated calm, "before we talk about missing necklaces and accusations of theft, perhaps we should consider the real cost of certain acquisitions in our city, and about the truth, which, unlike a necklace, cannot be hidden forever." Nora then dropped a final bomb, a seed of doubt planted with surgical precision. "And by the way, Mrs. Kane, if the necklace truly did disappear, I might suggest that the intent to frame someone wasn't the only motive. In these circles, a public scandal over a high-value necklace could have market implications for certain investors, couldn't it?" She paused, her eyes flicking toward the table of a rival investor, Arthur Vale, known for his aggressive market maneuvers. "A necklace that by chance has a nearly identical replica, being worn by someone present here, perhaps? No accusations, just a suggestion." The room descended into pandemonium, the focus of attention fragmented. Some reporters rushed to Arthur Vale's table. He was visibly rattled, texting furiously on his phone, his face pale. In the background, Lina Morales got a response on her phone, an old email between Kane Development executives and a zoning consultant asking for adjustments to a file had been found. The connection was real. Vivian Kane, faced with the exposed truth and the unexpected turn, panicked. Her mind, once so controlled, failed her. In a reflexive, almost unconscious gesture, in a desperate attempt to reassert control, to find the necklace and prove Nora a liar, she reached into her handbag and pulled out the diamond necklace. The silence was absolute for a second. Then the noise exploded. Vivian held the necklace in her hand, in plain sight of everyone, the proof of her own charade. Her face, once a mask of politeness, now contorted in shock and horror. She had authored her own trap, architected her own downfall. Her vengeful lie, exposed by her own desperate act, roared like an uncontrollable monster. Thomas Kane, watching his wife, felt the blow not just to his reputation, but to the very structure of his empire. The corporate risk was immense. He took a step back, physically distancing himself from Vivian. In an act of cold, public calculation, he abandoned her, turning his back. Vivian was isolated, her majesty undone, her power shattered. The humiliation she had planned for Nora had been spectacularly reversed. The Lighthouse Gala erupted into a scandal that echoed throughout the city and far beyond. Audio and video recordings of Nora's revelation, combined with the incessant camera flashes, were published live on social media and news sites. The name, Kane Development, went from a symbol of power to a synonym for corruption. Investors, their phones ringing off the hook, demanded explanation. The company's stock began to plummet, an instant reflection of the collapse in trust. The press, once controlled by the Cains, now reveled in the story, publishing features with the documents Nora had presented, corroborated by Lena Morales' verifications. In the midst of the chaos, some of Vivian Cain's allies quickly backed away, their faces twisted in disapproval, trying to minimize their association. Others muttered flimsy excuses and vanished into the crowd. Marcus, the manager, found Nora, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and awe. "Nora, you were incredible. But now, what do we do?" He shielded her from the horde of journalists, guiding her to a service exit. Samir, the chef, emerged from the kitchen, his face dusted with flour, and clapped Nora hard on the back, a gesture of pride and solidarity. "That's my girl," he grunted, his eyes shining. The public, who until now had only watched the elite from afar, vibrated with the news. The narrative was no longer just about a necklace or a waitress. It was about power and impunity, about the voice of the silenced finally emerging. San Francisco woke up to a David and Goliath story, and David, this time, wore a service uniform. Nora, away from the chaos of the hall, felt an overwhelming relief mixed with a profound exhaustion. The weight she had carried for so long had been lifted, but the battle was far from over. She refused offers to celebrate publicly, to give immediate interviews. Her voice had already spoken. Silence, now, was her refuge. She returned to her small apartment in the Mission District, the sense that the balance had shifted, a deep truth settling in her soul. She knew the Cain's legal and reputational battle would continue, but the seed of truth had been planted, and it would grow. She decided to turn the episode into fuel. The next day, her face still pale but her eyes shining with a new purpose, Nora began to plan her art exhibition. It would not be just a show of her drawings, but a visual narrative of the story of Lighthouse Books, of the lost community, of the fight against gentrification. It would be a tribute to her father's memory and to all the voices that had been silenced. Nora Kim's new status quo emerged slowly from the ashes of the scandal. She became a respected voice in the city, not just as the waitress who exposed the elite, but as an artist and activist. Her art exhibition, titled Harboring Truths, Echoes from the Mission, drew critical and cultural acclaim. Nora's paintings and installations, which depicted the beauty and pain of her community, the faces of the displaced, the resilience of roots against concrete, touched the hearts of many. She began to garner support to revitalize community spaces, to found a new bookstore in the Mission District that would be, in essence, a new version of Lighthouse Books. Nora did not seek a consuming revenge. She sought restoration, a way to heal the wounds opened by greed. She left Maison Ardente on her own terms, not fired, but choosing her own path, stronger, with a flourishing studio and emerging community projects. Vivian Cain's fate was a spectacular public fall. Socially ruined, she faced not only ostracism from the elite who had once revered her, but also inquiries and administrative proceedings related to her undue influence on the Harbor Tower project. Journalists, now emboldened to dig deeper, unearthed other stories of manipulation and abuse of power. Thomas Cain, a ruthless businessman, realized Vivian had become a liability to the corporation. He initiated a strategic separation, a public divorce, to save the company from total disaster. Vivian Cain became a cautionary tale, a modern-day parable. Power built on fear and manipulation has an inherent public fragility, and the truth, when revealed, can topple even the most untouchable queens. Cain development, though not utterly destroyed, entered a deep image crisis. Internal audits and public investigations delayed major projects and compromised negotiations. Thomas Cain managed to safeguard the corporation from a total collapse, but he lost political influence and the untouchable shine that once surrounded his name. His projects were now scrutinized with a skeptical eye, and the aura of invincibility was gone. The empire of concrete and steel had been shaken, not by a seismic tremor, but by the whisper of a waitress. The final message, the lasting impact of Nora Kim, was clear. Truth, when articulated by the silenced and ignored, holds immense power, not only to humble the tyrannical, but to initiate social repair, to give a voice to those who have lost it. Nora's triumph was not just personal, it was ethical and symbolic. It wasn't just about winning a battle against a socialite, but about restoring memory and visibility to the victims of gentrification, inspiring others to question, to observe, to fight for their own values. In San Francisco, the city of contrasts, art and justice had finally found a unified voice, born from the quiet courage of a waitress. If Nora Kim's story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit, leave a like. Subscribe for more stories that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Share this narrative with someone who needs a dose of courage. And tell us in the comments, what is your truth that still needs to be told?